So do you want to kind of set the stage for what's different now from a few years ago?
Sure. I think this translates across solo practices and group practices, seeing this shift. I know you've been around as a provider for over a decade, just like me, as a business owner provider. And
Yeah.
I feel like so much has changed. It feels, so interesting to see how different it feels to run a business now than it did even 5 years ago. Of course, one of the major things I think was COVID. It opened a lot of doors and opportunities for people because pre-COVID, it was very, very difficult to start a solo or group practice without having a physical brick and mortar location. I know, of course, there's outliers. There were telehealth providers back in the day, but very few and far between. And I think COVID opened the doors to another method for providing therapy that became more just well-known, telehealth. And in that, it also created the space to be able to have more flexibility to provide services from home. But it also then provided easier opportunities for people to start their own businesses, which I think is great, with essentially no need to have any money to do it. Really could just see your clients from your laptop in your bedroom. And so I think we've seen since COVID a big shift as group practice owners, more difficulty in finding therapists who want to work in a group practice versus just, going for it right from, right when they get out of grad school and trying it on their own. There's been a shift in like, I don't know, I'm assuming this was similar for you back in the day, but like our parents' generation, I think they had a job and they sort of had that same job for their whole life. And so, yeah. And so they sort of ingrained in our generation, because we're in our 40s, this like your resume needs to show that you are working for at least a good period of time. Like, I don't think we were taught that we had to stay at one place forever, but we were taught we should stay somewhere for years. And it needs to be very intentional and purposeful. And like, even if you don't love it, you stay. And now another, I think, great thing, but has impacts is that that's completely gone. Like there isn't this expectation. So there's a lot of people coming and going much more quickly, which just makes business a little bit more difficult for group practice owners. And then the impact that has is that we're seeing solo and group practices having a much harder time in the past year or so with getting referrals, because this visibility that was easier among the solos and groups that were around is now, it was much lower. There were more group practices that people worked in and fewer kind of solo practices. And now if I had to figure out the math to it, I'm sure our numbers have shifted to a point where group practices are almost the minority, and there are just 5 times the amount of solo providers than there were 5 years ago pre-COVID, which just makes it more difficult for each individual solo provider and group to be seen in their community and online.
Yeah. And we also have big tech in there, which we're not going to name any names because they love to sue people. Like you can't even say anything about not liking them without them sending you a letter. So we're not going to name any, but when we say like big mental health tech, think about the podcast you listen to and the ads that come on that have to do with therapy. And so you also have a lot of providers who, even if they're not in a solo practice on their own, maybe are with these companies that aren't our favorite.
Nope.
I don't find them to be ethical in the way they treat patient data, in the way they treat their therapists, in the way that they frame their business, which is a tech company and not a mental health company.
Right.
So we also have a lot of care being provided through those, because these big tech companies have a lot of money that are going to take up, a lot of space on the internet when people are searching. And those of you who are listening, do not panic. Like, this is not a panic point. We're just laying a foundation for how things are different now than they were a year ago. We do know more people are seeking mental health services now than they ever have, like way more than during COVID and right after COVID. I don't know if after COVID exists, but you know what I mean? Like, so there are a lot of people seeking therapy. And the
Yep.
problem, as we're defining it, is visibility.
Yeah.
So what to you, well, let's talk about starting a group practice. Let's do this first.
Okay.
If somebody wants to start a group practice, they want to be a great boss. That's always not, they just want to make money, but they
Right.
want to be a great boss. They want to create great opportunities for other therapists, and they want to like help their community in a specific way. These are people who are going to be great group practice owners. And they want to make money too, because this is a business.
Yeah.
What do they need to think about in their startup? Maybe this person is full or close to full. They have referrals coming in. They really feel like they could support at least one other clinician at first. What do they need to think about and know?
I would say beyond what you've said is that they want to lead. I feel like that's a big thing that gets overlooked because a lot of people will start a group practice, and this was me included 13 years ago when I started my group, of being like, I'm going to be more hands off and like, find great therapists and just like let them do their own thing. And I think for a lot of people, that's a mask for a fear of leading and feeling like you can somehow have a business and a group of people where you don't have to like lead and give evaluations and potentially fire, like that you can have this like very, cool laid back vibe where everyone is just doing their work without having to be asked, and you won't have to lead. And that just isn't the case. So I would say, because it's one of the biggest stress points for burnout for group practice owners is just like staff management, and you'll never be able to make everyone happy, and so you have to be able to emotionally regulate and be okay with making decisions that not don't necessarily make every single person happy, but will ensure the health of the business as a whole, and everyone in the business as a whole. And so if leading people and having difficult conversations, and leading those difficult conversations is something you don't want to do, I would be thinking about, if owning a business that employs people is something that you want to do.
Right. Because it's really like just not being responsible for the business
Yeah,
to not lead.
right.
This laid back, it's kind of like being the cool girl. Like it doesn't
Yeah,
exist.
yeah, no.
The
Nope.
laid back boss who like lets everybody do their thing doesn't really exist as a boss. It's part of why I stay busy. Right?
Yep.
It's part of why like so many people come to me to start their own practice, because they either have a micromanaging group practice owner or one who is like so laissez-faire, they don't know the boundaries, and then they get in trouble for things because the boundaries were never set properly. And
Right.
there's no sort of communication about expectations.
Yep. And so if leading, like really leading, also feels like something you're wanting to do, then I guess the next thing to consider is like what the current pain points are for businesses like ours, so that you can kind of jump into leading and owning a practice with the awareness of what things you are going to have to be focusing on, like more than others. So like 13 years ago when I started my practice, marketing wasn't something I actually had to focus on much. It was more like figuring out how to actually lead. That felt like a bigger issue, or thing to tackle than marketing, because like 13 years ago, everyone had wait lists, just long wait lists. And so filling them up wasn't something that I had to even like focus on learning how to do. Whereas now, like you're seeing so many solo and group practice owners who didn't have to do this, like scrambling to be like, what marketing methods are going to work now in this environment? Because the marketing methods of 5 years ago don't necessarily work now,
Right.
as
Right.
our environment shifts, so does how things work shift. And so my assumption, based off of everyone that I talk to and my own experience as a practice owner too, is that marketing and recruiting are two of the more difficult things right now when it comes to having a group practice. And so just ensuring that you have the time and focus to be able to invest time, I guess, into those two areas, because it takes like some work and trial and error to see what's going to work for your particular business in terms of getting visibility in your area when visibility is just so low all
Yeah.
around. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is like something we've been talking about at Abundance for probably about a year of like, it doesn't mean you're not going to be successful. It just means you have to be a lot more intentional with your marketing in order to be successful. And it might take a little bit longer for you to reach your goals than it did before. Like we had people in our like high touch programs who were getting full in 3 months previously, and now it's taking about 6 months. And those are our programs with like a lot of mentorship and a lot of hand holding. So you have to be really clear about what your marketing strategies are, and you have to actually do them and not just think about them or do them next week.
And do them consistently. I see that too, is like when people get into a space of anxiety, or like they're freaking out because all of a sudden their referrals are really low, they start to throw like 100 things against the wall. And what I see in that is like, it's nearly impossible to know what works when you throw 100 things at the wall. But two, if they are like feeling like something's not working, they stop doing it right away and move to the next thing. When business ownership is a lot like a big ship. Like anything you do does, whether you're small or really large, takes a little bit of time for you to see the, I don't know, like the success in something. And so just because you start, do a week of a ton of social media and, doing videos, doesn't mean that it's going to translate to you getting, any new clients from it next week. A lot of these things take time. And so I always say, especially in these cases with marketing efforts, is you need to do, I suggest doing one thing at a time, all in for around 6 months, so you can actually see if that thing is working. And like throughout those 6 months, if you see traction happening, like looking deeper into what's making it work, doing more of that, looking at parts of that maybe aren't maybe helpful, removing those things so you're not wasting efforts, and like really just focusing on that one thing before you start to shift to another sort of marketing method.
Absolutely. We go into fix it mode, right? Like we're like, so I totally understand the impulse to do everything. And then there are lots of shiny objects out there. And the people marketing them are good at marketing them, So it's easy to feel like something's a magic bullet, but nothing is a magic bullet. Not a single thing is going to be a magic bullet that works for everybody. Unfortunately, I would really love a magic bullet sometimes, wouldn't you?
I would too. I feel like, whenever, people will sometimes assume that because I've had a group practice for so long that I don't struggle with any of the things that people who are newly starting a group practice are struggling with. And that's not necessarily the case. My practice in Chicago also has less referrals than it did last year, just like 99% of the others. It's just a matter of, me being aware of it and like engaging in some act to change it, versus like sort of sitting back and feeling despair and like, I don't know, closing your ears and your eyes and being like, it'll change on its own.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, like people will come to me and be like, I saw in this free Facebook group I'm in about how like everybody's slow, and even these people who've been established forever are slow. And I'm like, yeah, and they're posting about it in a Facebook group instead of doing something about it. So if you don't want to be like them, then get out of those groups, because they don't help. And most of the information is not great anyway. And do the things that have worked for you in the past and see if those work first. Because most of the time they will, if it was like a really well thought out strategy. And then add something else if you need to. Now, I'm curious, are you seeing a difference at all? Is there, and it might just be a slight difference or none at all, between group practices that are niched and group practices that are more generalized?
In terms of
Like
referrals? Or
yeah, referrals. Or is it easier for one group over the other right now?
That's a good question. I mean, if we assume that both of these practices are well established, and it's not because they're new that,
Mhm.
you know, because then they'll both struggle for the same reason, initially. If they're both established, I don't think there's necessarily that big of a difference, even though I do talk a lot about as a way of forecasting and like being able to weather the future storms, that a niche practice is a great thing to have.
Mhm.
I guess my question would be, if it's a multidisciplinary practice that like can support the whole person, those are like, it's not necessarily two sides of the same coin, but those two things are two types of group practices that have the easiest time when it comes to marketing and recruiting. If you're a group practice that's not intentionally multi-specialty treating the whole person, but just kind of like a hodgepodge of just hiring random people,
Mhm.
I think those are the practices that struggle the most. But if you're very niched, one, you have an easier time knowing who your ideal audience is, which a multi-specialty practice doesn't, because they pretty much serve everyone, right? Which is
Mhm.
more difficult in terms of marketing. But what the multi-specialty practice has is the ability to work with more businesses in order to get new referrals, because they have, if they're a larger practice that can like sort of treat the whole person, they have just more flexibility in being able to see more types of clients. Like I said, the issue comes to those practices that say they're multi-specialty, when in reality they're more random, right? They're just
Mhm.
hiring anyone who comes in, and they don't have like an intentional sort of process for who they're treating as a whole. Like my practice is multi-specialty. We have psych testing, med management, therapists that treat different parts of the lifespan, so that when a family member comes in, our practice can pretty much treat anyone in that family. Each therapist has a specialty, and that makes it then easier to market as well. A little more difficult than a very niched practice, because there you only have to focus on one issue, you know,
Mhm.
but I find that those two options, like an intentional whole person multi-specialty practice or a very niched one, are the two types of practices, group practices, that'll weather kind of the storms that we're kind of seeing right now.
Mhm. Yeah. I ask because when I think about just marketing in general, niche is so much easier. Like
Yep.
it gives you your copy. It
Right.
gives you
Yep.
everything.
Yep.
So that was my suspicion.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. So when we market in my practice, it's like we have to gear our marketing in a lot of different directions to
mhm.
reach the couples therapist that we have, to reach the child therapist we have. But
Right.
as long as you're intentional about like having a sort of through line or process for each one,
Mhm.
then it's the same as having, I guess, like multiple niches.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
a little bit more effort and being
Right.
intentional about like how do you highlight each one of those things individually without watering down the other ones.
Right. And that relies on your individual therapists each having a niche.
Yes. Yes.
Because otherwise it'd just be chaos.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the difference between like an unintentional practice that says they're multi-specialty, when everyone just doesn't, like every therapist just sees whoever and they don't have their own specialization and niche themselves. Then yeah,
Yeah.
that's the practice that'll have the most difficulty standing
Yeah.
out.
So hodgepodge practices are out for 2025.
Yeah, they've been out for a while, but
Yeah.
yeah, for sure for 2025, especially as like referrals are just a little bit more difficult. Getting niched, whether as a whole practice or making sure that each of your individual therapists is very clear on their bios and all of that in terms of who they see, is going to be what makes it easier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And what I've always found, so this hasn't necessarily changed in the over a decade that I've had a group, is that I find, and of course there's outliers to everything. I always feel like anytime I give suggestions, I'm like, of course there's outlying situations where what I say, like people are successful outside of that. But I find that um the way to grow your referrals is through relationship building and less through like trying to get every single person to know you exist.
Mhm.
So in my group practice, each location that I have, we focus on like 3 relationships that in the community, whether it's a school or a hospital or another business, healthcare related business. We focus on 3 relationships that we nurture indefinitely. Of course, the byproduct is we become known with other people, but we look for 3 types of businesses or places or local businesses that support our ideal clients in that location. And we nurture those 3 relationships. One, it makes it much more manageable than like feeling like you have to spend every day like outreaching to like every business all around you and having coffee with like every other practice owner around you, or, you know, chiropractor and dietitians all around. But like 3, I always say 3, good relationships, and you can look at your existing clients and say, like, where are they going? Who are their doctors? Like, what are they doing? Are they going to, like, do all your clients go to this local yoga studio? Okay, maybe that's like one of the places. But to then, you know, reach out to those 3 and then spend your time throughout the years nurturing those 3 relationships. Literally, it's so simple. It's a lot less stressful. But if you focus on that, you're going to have that reciprocal relationship. And I always say, start with, like from a networking perspective, more than a marketing one, in that you want to ask about them. Like, everyone wants to talk about their business. If you go up to them and are like wanting to talk only about your business, it tends to have, I think, a little less success than being like, I have a lot of clients that come to your yoga studio or that come to see you for chiropractic work. I wanted to get to know, like, what kind of stuff do you guys do, so that when we get new clients, if that's a need, I can refer them to you. You're more likely to get interest from that person who is like, oh, she knows about me. She knows about my business. My ideal clients as a chiropractor seem to be going to her practice. Now we can start this relationship.
Yeah. And, you know, we have this in common. I've always preached, like, networking is the thing that built my practice. And I tell people like 5 marketing strategies, one of which is a website, one of which is networking. Like, those 2 are set in stone. And I understand it when people don't understand what networking is, but there is some resistance to networking. So I love that they're getting this reinforced, that it can also fill an entire group practice. How many clinicians do you have working for you at this point?
Like 50.
So
Yeah.
like, it can fill a group practice when you are focused on really just forming a relationship. That's all you're doing. You are not selling yourself. You are not being salesy.
And I'm an introvert. You know me. You and I are opposites in these ways. I don't like talking to people. I don't like meeting new people. And so that was one of the things that I struggled with most, was having to get in front of people. And like I said, 13 years ago when I started my group, marketing wasn't as big of an issue because referrals were so high. So I lucked out as a person who doesn't like to meet new people. I lucked out for a long time. But that's the one thing I love about networking over marketing. I don't love either. So at the end of the day, for those that like don't like it, you cannot like it and still do it. What I find is that marketing feels too salesy for me. I can hire people that can do it for me, right? But I prefer to create relationships, which marketing doesn't do, networking does. And networking is less about trying to sell yourself. It's more about getting a relationship with someone where you both mutually are helping a certain population in your neighborhood.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you, Maureen. And you're going to be doing a training in the Abundance Party. So for those who are in there, make sure you don't miss it. For those who are not yet in the Abundance Party, hop in. You also all need to go to the grouppracticeexchange.com. This is Maureen's, this is where she teaches you how to build a group practice. So if you are considering a group practice, you need to join that membership. It's affordable. You can do it. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to that training.
Yeah.